Whenever I look through this portfolio that holds all my old paintings, I'm reminded of this painting that I never finished, and it kind of haunted me every time I look through this book. If you've been following me on Instagram for a while, you might recognize it. It's this Peter Pan tribute piece that I did in gouache back in July of 2017. It was quite a while ago, so I don't exactly remember what inspired it, but here's the initial sketch that started it all. Wendy is coyly tugging on Peter's shirt collar, which Peter doesn't seem to mind, while Tinkerbell is trying to pull him away, unsuccessfully. It's actually quite rare that I stop in the middle of the painting and just abandon it altogether. But I gave up on this one because I was so frustrated with how their faces were turning out. I had a hard time painting profile views, which I still do. I remember spending a long time just to get Wendy's face looking acceptable. And then when I moved on to Peter's face, I just ran out of patience with it. I gave up. I felt like I had started off on a really bad foot and it was only going to be an uphill battle from here. So I put this painting away because I didn't want to look at it anymore and have it remind me of this failure. But in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to come back to it one day when I felt a little braver and felt a little more confident in my skills to be able to fix it. And so after a year and 5 months, I guess I finally felt ready to tackle it again. I thought it would be a fun challenge for me, as well as a fun video for you guys to see how much better could I execute this painting this time around after some time has passed. I originally set off on this task with the idea of just picking this painting back up where I left it, but I made a last-minute decision to start from scratch and paint it a little bigger than I did before. And when it came to the colors, I felt like I had a pretty clear idea what the colors were gonna look like in the painting, but I decided to do one more comp before I start the painting to remind myself what exactly it was that I wanted. And I'm really glad that I did, because I did end up making some changes. I stayed away from the blues this time and used a lot more green, orange, and yellow to end up with a much warmer color scheme. And I realized I really liked this direction a lot better. So not only was doing this color comp a refresher for me and a kind of a practice run for the real thing, it really helped me a lot throughout the painting because I referred back to it constantly. And with the color comp down, I was ready to start painting. I started out by how I usually like to start out my gouache paintings, which is to use it kind of like watercolor, applying very thin washes of color and working in big groups. I lay down a thin wash of blue for the background and a thin wash of yellow for the characters. It helps to visualize painting it in one big shape rather than painting all the little individual shapes separately, which can weaken the overall value statement. Because it's really easy to get lost in the nuances of different values and color. So breaking down your painting into simple shapes and very simple value statements will keep you from getting lost in the complexities and help guide you along the painting. And by this point, I was ready to go in with the local colors. You'll see that as I'm laying down the local colors, I'm thinking to myself, keep the top-facing planes cooler and the down-facing planes warmer. And that's because I wanted a strong sense of warm bounce light coming from below, wherever it's coming from. The source doesn't matter. You are the conductor of this painting. You can cast any kind of lighting on it as long as you keep it consistent. So as I'm laying each respective local color down, I'm thinking the top planes have to be a cooler green and the down-facing planes have to be a warmer green. I painted every element in the painting with this sort of treatment, and it was rather quick to fill everything out because all I had to remember was that any part of the form that was facing upward had to be cooler because it's receiving cool light from the moon. And every down-facing planes of the form had to be warmer because it's receiving the bounce light from below. So before I start rendering Wendy's face, here's a look back at the old painting for comparison. I was also really displeased with how I had treated her hair. I thought I made it look really flat when her ringlets are so iconic to her design. So I really wanted to do them justice this time. And another thing I really wanted to nail down right was her expression, because I felt in the original painting I didn't quite get that right. It had gotten a little muddied from the painting process. So to prevent that from happening, I constantly referred back to the drawing so that the little nuances of her expression and design wouldn't get lost underneath all the paint throughout the painting process. I don't like to render their faces to 100% right away. I find that around a certain point, you feel ready to jump to other parts of the painting. And so when I got to a certain point, I moved on to Peter's face. And the same thing with him. I'm constantly referring back to the drawing to make sure I'm getting the expression just as I had in the drawing. And I'm also referring back to the first attempt at his face so that I know what not to do. Thankfully, after almost a year and a half, I have improved on painting profile views, so it was a lot easier this time around. By this point, where pretty much all of the first layers of paint were laid in and I was happy with how the faces were turning out, I was ready to go in with the more finishing layers, which just means I am going to be applying thicker, more opaque layers of paint so that the thinner washes of gouache don't look so patchy and it looks more finished. It has a higher level of finish. And during this process, I make a lot of adjustments to the value or the color temperature over the first layer of gouache that I laid down. And as I'm going in with the thicker layers of paint, I'm making sure that I'm treating it like I had treated each individual parts before. Everything that is facing up has to be a little bit cooler, and everything that's facing downward has to be warmer. And I'm realizing that this is not a piece that required a lot of rendering. The rim light on the characters is doing so much to help create a sense of form, and the shift in color temperature is helping to give everything a sense of changing planes, which reinforces the idea that these figures are three-dimensional things that are existing in space. I realized that it really didn't need a lot of rendering. And in fact, any excessive rendering would have taken attention away from their faces. So apart from their faces and their hair, I really didn't render very much in this painting. And the only real time-consuming part of the process was mixing enough of the paint that I needed to be able to apply paint evenly enough so that it doesn't look splotchy and it would look finished. And really that was the hardest thing, was to lay down the paint evenly, because gouache is finicky and it's also really hard to achieve a smooth gradient in gouache. So that's really what required a lot of patience and time. So here's how the painting looked when it was at about, I would say, 75% of the way there. And at this point, I step back and take stock of what needs to get done before I end up spending way too many unnecessary hours on one little thing. It's really easy to get carried away when you are bringing an area to more detail and a higher level of finish, only to find out that it really wasn't necessary, and in fact it takes away from the whole painting. So around this point, it's really important to step back and really prioritize what needs to get done, because realistically not everyone has all the time in the world to keep painting forever. It has to get done at some point. So here's a list I came up with when I took a step back and assessed what needed to get done in my painting. I wanted to give the faces a higher level of finish. I accidentally applied some green to Wendy's face, so you see me trying to fix that. I think it kind of worked out though, because I think her face needed a little bit of a cool element to it anyway, so thankfully didn't need to start a third new painting. I had to finish up the curtains. I wanted the curtains to be translucent and show through a bit of the background, so I took the background color and diluted it very heavily and applied thin washes of it onto the curtain where I wanted it to be showing through. I really wanted to even out the background so that it doesn't detract from any of the foreground elements, and I wanted to make sure that it was dark enough so that the characters would really pop from it. And I couldn't forget about the silhouettes in the background against the moon. I actually really struggle with this part. I struggle with anything that is too graphic, so I did edit this part a fair bit after the painting was done in Photoshop. And just generally polishing everything up and making things look as beautiful as I can possibly make it. And once I was happy with everything, then I needed to paint in the Pixie Dust. So I decided to do a little practice run on the printout of the drawing with a highlighter to indicate the dust. I wanted there to be this kind of line of action with the dust. I wanted it to loop around the characters in an appealing curve that complemented the line of action and the gesture of the characters. And once I felt my wrist had been adequately loosened up, I was ready to do the real thing. I started dotting along the line that I visualized to be the line of action for the dust. So it created a path for me to work from, and I built up from there. Just added more and more dots. I try to place them as randomly as possible, but at the same time fall within the line of action so that it wasn't totally randomly placed. And after some careful and strategic dotting and sprinkling some of that magical pixie dust on Wendy and putting in the final polishing touches, the painting was finished. Not to toot my own horn, but I really think there's a huge jump between the two paintings. Now granted, the first attempt wasn't fully finished. It was just after having rendered their faces to a certain point. But even still, I feel like around the same point in the painting, the second attempt looked a lot better. I felt like this time around I really didn't run into any major issues. Sure, I struggled with rendering Wendy's face again at times, but not to the point of hopelessness and giving up. I felt like after I had gotten their faces to a point where I was happy with it, it was pretty smooth sailing from there. So now I wonder if I had taken a bit more time and care in the first place, and I wonder if the key difference between now and 17 months ago was being prepared with a solid plan of attack and having the patience to see it through. And because I'm so thrilled with how this piece turned out, I decided to turn them into prints. It took a lot of trial and error to get it right, but I couldn't be happier with how they turned out. The colors look really vibrant and the lines are crisp. So I'm really proud to offer this as a limited edition print on my online shop. It'll actually be my first official limited print run. And not only that, I'm also offering a 13 by 19 version of this piece. I think it looks absolutely amazing in this larger size, and you can really see every brush stroke in this one. These prints will be limited to 40 copies each, and once they're gone, so don't miss out. You can find them at chrishongart.com or just find the link down below in the description. So that is it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this one. It's a video that I've been meaning to do for a while, and I'm really happy that I managed to pull it off. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!